The writer Arthur C. Clarke is the nearest thing we have to a modern-day soothsayer. He is a one-man think tank, listened to by the United Nations, Microsoft, and NASA.
0, 0, 0.
He was the first to propose communication satellites and, at the age of 27, proved their technical feasibility. And 30 years ago, his script for the film 2001 was so ahead of its time, it helped kickstart research into artificial intelligence. This is a film about a young boy from a post office family in Somerset, England, who left that world behind to become one of the most respected visionaries of our time. Arthur C. Clarke may have made his name with 2001, A Space Odyssey, but with the next millennium looming on the horizon, the date 2001 can no longer be used as shorthand for the future. So Clarke has spun the calendar forward 1,000 years with his new novel, 3001, The Final.
His great gift is a lyricism with the universe and inanimate objects.
A quality clearly evident in Clarke's most famous short story, The Sentinel, which was set on the moon and was the seed from which 2001 would grow.
Yes, that was a story called The Sentinel, which was about the discovery of an artifact on the moon left there by some alien race as a kind of burglar alarm to alert the universe, you know, when we climbed out of the nursery. And this idea is now taken quite seriously. I mean, people think we should look for artifacts in the solar system. It's quite possible there may be things around, you know, that have been left here a few million years ago.
Clarke wrote The Sentinel for a BBC competition in 1948. It was rejected. But 2 decades later, the story's tale of the discovery of an alien object buried in the lunar dust was developed by Clarke with film director Stanley Kubrick into 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Here in this London suburb, space scientists, industrial designers, and conceptual artists from all over the world are gathering at the MGM studios.
Clarke began work on the film in 1964, writing the screenplay and novel in tandem, as well as acting as a scientific advisor.
They have been brought together to contribute their knowledge, their ideas, their visions, to advise and consult in the filming of Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey.
I remember how Stanley did contact me when I was working actually in Time Life, working on a book called Man and Space. And, you know, Stanley said, I want to make the proverbial good science fiction movie, implying that there hadn't been any up to that date.
Well, visually it's breathtaking. It's hard to go back and recreate that moment when it first appeared, when it was so stunning and looked like nothing else that had been made.
It's very difficult to explain the effect it had on me. I felt like I had been just, in a way, ripped out of the cradle, like I'd been transported into a universe where miraculous things were possible.
Well, there was never a movie like it before, and there hasn't been a movie since. But it did influence the look of space in all movies and television shows since then. Just as there has never been a mafia movie since The Godfather that doesn't refer in some way or another to The Godfather, there has never been another science fiction movie or television show that isn't in debt to some degree to 2001. So it set the agenda for the look of space.
In a way, 2001 is timeless. It's sort of in a time warp of its own. It still stands up remarkably well. I was pleased to see that recently in the poll of film critics, they put it as one of the 10 greatest films of all time, and which is, of course, is very, very flattering, very heartwarming. It's hardly dated at all, except, of course, for the actual date itself.
It is the best science fiction film ever made, but it's also one of the best films ever made. So to put it into a genre is unfair. It's really a film about ideas. It's not a commercial film in any way. That's why it's amazing that it's made millions and millions of dollars.
This is the screenplay of the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey, which Stanley Kubrick and I have been working on for the last 2 years. It's a space odyssey because we want to show the opening days of the exploration of the solar system, not just the moon, which will be old hat by the year 2001. In fact, the story really begins on the moon and takes off from there. We want to go right out to the giant planets beyond Mars.
Given the literally cosmic dimensions of the film, Clarke and Kubrick were determined to root it in some kind of scientific reality. Enormous efforts went into accurately visualizing the universe beyond the thin, protecting veil of the Earth's atmosphere.
Before 2001, every other science fiction film was a great B movie. And there were entertainment movies. Whereas 2001 was based on scientific knowledge or projection into the future, to the year 2001. And so it was termed as a science fact film, not a science fiction film.
Most science fiction films trample on the science terribly. They don't care about the science, whereas Kubrick and Clarke did, and I think it added to their art a great deal, and they consulted scientists and NASA and so forth to try to get things right.
Two of these men, space scientists Fred Ordway and Harry Lange, formerly of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and both active in space vehicle construction, are Stanley Kubrick's principal astronautic advisors.
My experience at NASA was 100% instrumental in working on the film 2001. Stanley said to me, he said, well, I can get better illustrators than you are, a dime a dozen in New York City, they're all out of work, but I don't have your background and the ability to design interplanetary space vehicles based on some of the knowledge that I had.
This is the helmet I've designed that will be worn in the film by the 6 astronauts that will go onto the moon base.
I had to be a little bit careful because during my time at NASA, everything was considered top secret and was locked away. We were still in the throes of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. So I had to be a little bit watchful that I didn't bring anything into the science which was critical.
The details are what matter, even if you're not aware of them at the time. We worked together and brainstormed and developed ideas and threw away, most of them, and the thing eventually evolved over a period of almost 4 years.
All aspects of production had to meet a strict test of scientific realism. To simulate the low-gravity environment of a revolving space station, Kubrick commissioned one of the most expensive and innovative sets in cinema history, a huge centrifuge where most of actor Gary Lockwood's scenes were filmed.
Well, I'd say it's one of the highlights of my career. It's not the best role I've ever had, but it was certainly the best time I've ever had. 2001 was put together by a lot of very brilliant people. I mean, I've never seen anything like it ever. I think that the wheel, or the big, huge centrifuge that Keir and I lived in the picture was an astounding piece of work. They'd sort of harness me up in 2001 and turn the wheel on, and I'd hang up there upside down trying to be cool, So imagine hanging upside down. And the first time they took me up there, I took a fork and bit into my food, and the food went shh.
Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal?
But Hal, the ship's computer with a mind of its own, was the real star of 2001.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
I suppose there are lots of scholarly articles on intelligent computers or computers that could interact directly with people, but in creating Hal as a fictional entity, he took all of this specialized knowledge and gave us a very visceral notion of what it means if computers become as intelligent as humans.
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
So to think forward far enough to imagine a computer that can do natural language and reasoning, even scheming, a computer that is capable of dealing with ethical dilemmas, that's very out there for 1968, and yet many of the areas of artificial intelligence are moving in exactly those directions.
I don't think anybody doubts that artificial intelligence of all sorts of levels, including much higher levels than ours, will be achieved. But artificial consciousness, that's the interesting question. I mean, and I've suggested the first time that a computer cracks a really original joke, we know that consciousness has arrived.
Artificial intelligence was just one element of 2001's grand philosophical subject.
On the human side, we are concerned with nothing less than man's place in the universe and his possible position in the pecking order of cosmic intelligence.
Hardly the stuff of box office blockbusters, but somehow MGM was persuaded to part with millions of dollars so that Clarke and Kubrick could pursue their creative ambitions.
It's the kind of film that could never be made if it had to be approved by a production executive. It has a screenplay that would be inexplicable to anyone. You could not pitch this film. You could not say, this is what it's about, and they would say, oh, great, here's my check, you can go make it. It is a film that inspires people to meditate about it and speculate about it. It gives us big ideas, but it doesn't insist that it be the same ideas that it has.
The film's central theme was an exploration of the evolution of humanity. From ape to human, to artificial intelligence and beyond. But 2001 left its first audiences perplexed.
It did contain all sorts of subtleties, and a lot of people were baffled at the first viewing. In fact, the initial reaction to the film was very strange. I mean, it was a disastrous in many ways.
I remember the opening night, I had a seat in the balcony for that premiere, and after the intermission, my date and I were able to find good seats on the first floor because so many people had walked out, including Rock Hudson, who stalked down the aisle saying, will somebody tell me what the hell this is about?
We premiered in Washington, we premiered in New York City, we were raked by the critics, no one liked us.
One MGM executive after the first screening said, well, that's the end of Stanley Kubrick.
And within 8 or 10 days, the audiences were all over the streets.
I have an electronic mutiny on my hands.
Clarke's unorthodox yet influential writing career was officially recognized in America earlier this year when scientists, celebrities and fans from around the world convened to pay tribute to this far-sighted thinker and his new work, 3001.
Let me introduce live from Sri Lanka, Mr. Arthur C. Clarke.
Very nice. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I'm delighted to have a chance of talking to you from Colombo.
We have a question now from Gary Lockwood, one of the stars of the film. Hello, Arthur. Long time no see.
Lovely to hear from you, and you're glad to know, of course, I've revived you in 3001.
Well, as I do in a lot of the movies I do, I died. Well, what happens in 2001 is the computer Hal is paranoid. I help make him paranoid. He kills me. My body flies off into space.
In 3001, Clarke revives the astronaut Frank Poole, who was attacked by the rogue computer HAL 1,000 years earlier and was last seen drifting in space, air supply severed and presumed dead.
In 2001, you see...
In 3001, I think we see pure, unadulterated Clarke, brimming with great ideas, lots of technical interest, fascinating technical things happening, ideas coming thick and fast, but it doesn't have the darkness of a Kubrick's hand in there.
There is an optimism in his writing, and it grows, I think, from his belief that finally problems will yield to scientific solution. In the 90s, it may be a little more difficult to believe that.
Perhaps the real surprise in 3001 is that Clarke retains a near religious faith in scientific progress, even as the 20th century draws to a close and ever fewer people are convinced technology can deliver easy solutions to the problems of the next millennium.
I think he has a really strong sense of a kind of underlying goodness that motivates the universe. Clarke is a very great optimist for some crazy reason, and it comes out through his writing, through his lyricism, through his just sense that people in their hearts are basically good.
My writing is almost always optimistic. There's a lot of, I think, cyberpunk out there, you know, these horrible futures you wouldn't want to live in. Unpleasant, violent futures are obviously much more dramatic. But I feel that if you are optimistic, you have a chance of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Coming up next on 13, a milestone movie from Arthur C. Clarke's sci-fi classic. Computer Hal is in control in director Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. Stay with us and enjoy a special Cinema 13 screening on your member-supported station.
Just ahead, the unforgettable, mind-bending classic 2001, A Space Odyssey. Then at 11:15 tonight...
Tonight at 8:55 on 13.